Welcome. Hello. Episode 12, Second Look Sports Show. Brandon Brown, Justin Arnberg, and Alex Mandarino with you as always. Exciting stuff all around. Some of you guys are exhausted. I'm mentally exhausted after that trade deadline. It was a lot going on it felt like a lot of the Atlantic teams did a lot of work on the deadline day, but really was all around the league. A lot of exciting moves all around. How did you guys feel like that NHL trade deadline went, just in general? Like thoughts just off the hop here.
Yeah, I would say, uh, okay. Basically, the way I can put it is that was probably the best deadline I've seen in like all time history. Like, it
Wow.
wasn't the most trades in deadline history, but the amount of good quality players going at this deadline was insane. And that's why it was the best deadline to me ever.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of mystery around it too. Obviously, things kind of kicked off. It felt like Thursday night with the Brock Nelson move to Colorado, which was kind of unexpected in itself, and kind of kicked off that idea of we don't really know where any of these guys are going to go. We had Rantanen kind of rumored in multiple places. We had lots of different teams involved on lots of different players. And as we got closer to the deadline, we just kind of got more and more clues as to where these guys were going to go. And it led to some fantastic narratives that I think everybody just loved to follow throughout the day. So I think it was, Justin's right. It really was a deadline to remember. And I think it was one of the best ones that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, like usually like a deadline, like I find like it gets built up and then sometimes there's a bunch of letdown. Obviously, there's a bunch of pieces behind the scenes that you don't know, like hey, you have a trade here and then it falls apart. But yeah, personally like just the amount of guys moved, the Atlantic and the Central divisions really just loading up on each other and
Yeah.
going, hey, you're gonna make an all-out move? Okay, I see you. I'm gonna raise you and do one more because we need to win. Like it was just really, really good. You can tell who the best GMs are in the league, in my opinion. They do the best moves. Um, and yeah, like it was just a wild, wild day. And I know we're gonna get all into it.
Hmm.
First, right off the hop, I just have to say the Winnipeg Jets, the best team in the league, are probably the biggest losers at the deadline. And it's just because of Winnipeg itself. Like because Cheveldayoff literally came out and said, I did not want to keep on my first round picks. Like I tried to get rid of them. I tried to trade them away. But unfortunately, there was other offers that people wanted, and some he didn't say that players didn't want to come here, but like everyone knows Winnipeg is the market that no one wants to go to,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that's most challenging. So to me, that's why they're the biggest loser. But yeah,
I still think I mean, we'll get into it in a bit, but I think they took away a lot based on like their needs. They had a lot of similar needs to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we're a little bit more dialed in. I know at least Brandon and I, you're a little bit more in some way subject to the Canadians, but you follow the Leafs pretty heavily too, Justin. But like I feel like Winnipeg, in the sense of what they needed, bringing in Tanev and Shen, like they're not sexy moves. We saw some sexy moves from the Ottawa Senators. We'll get more into that with Alex Adams in a second, but they made the moves that I think they needed to make. But it is unfortunate. I didn't see that clip. Winnipeg's always dealing from like a position of difficulty. Like they're always a little step behind because, yeah, who wants to go to Winnipeg? It's really hard to get free agents there. But we saw that with Columbus for a while, and they managed to attract some good talent over the past couple of years. So who knows if that narrative ever changes? I still think Winnipeg went away
yeah.
with a lot more than maybe they thought they were going to get moving forward. I don't know.
They definitely they went for the big one. They went for big ones, and then they at the end of the day they filled holes. That's what they
Hmm.
did. They filled holes that they felt like they needed to do. I just think when you look at the rest of the Central Division, they missed out. Like they missed out on some big, big names. So that's why I think they're the losers.
Sure. But it's tough. I mean, Winnipeg's not exactly a desirable market. Some of those players that you think they may have been in on or were making calls on potentially had either whether it was limited no trade clauses. Potentially, guys are talking to GM saying, "I don't want to go there." We know that's been a problem in the past. So for them to just get some ancillary things done and make sure that they're prepared, it's also a little bit of of a kind of a confidence boost to the team. You know, they feel like they're ready to go into another playoffs as a top team in the West and really make some noise, do some damage. So for them, I think they did what they could, and I think it can only help them. They're not going to be a worse team, so we'll just have to see kind of how things shake out in the West once we get there.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I agree. I agree. It was,
We're
but overall, what a wild deadline. Like, what
great
a,
Yeah,
deadline.
like,
yeah,
just insanity. Like, obviously, you go from Seth, like, I know you said Brock Nelson kicked it off. Well, I personally think Seth Jones did like last week. Like
fair. Yeah,
that
yeah.
deal to me starts deadline week. And then you have Trent Frederick after that. You have Yanni Gore going back to Tampa Bay. They make their all-in move early. Like, man, like just the amount of high quality players that moved like teams this deadline was crazy. And then like deadline day, just like usually there's like a lull or like there's a point like, but like immediately when we get right into it with Alex Adams here in a couple of minutes, but immediately when something happened at Sens practice where like players started like fought, like going off the ice and then like going and having a team meeting and then like came back on. Josh Norris isn't on and it gets traded to for Dylan Cozens. Like from that point on, it was just chaos for the rest of the day. Like it was like holy shit, like who's going where next? Like that's where it kind of felt like watching and like Elliot Friedman obviously and the rest of the insiders did a great job as they do. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I don't know. I don't think I've had like there's usually one move on deadline day where you're like, okay, this team won, but like it just felt like I said, every single team just like felt like okay, we're not done. We're just gonna keep on adding and we're gonna keep on getting better. And it was like, where are they getting the assets from? Where are they getting the cap space from to fit these players in? Like crazy, crazy stuff. Crazy.
Yeah, you saw a lot of deals, and I feel like a lot of them were made in the anticipation of the cap going up too. They're like, oh, we'll be able to hang on to these guys past this year and moving down the
Yep.
line. So a lot of stuff to get to. We're pumped. Let's just pump the brakes for a second here, and we'll we teased it a little bit there. We have Sportsnet's Alex Adams. He covers the Ottawa Senators for Sportsnet, as mentioned. So busy day for him yesterday, and busy day for the Sens. So we'll get all into that and his opinions on how the Sens did overall on Friday, the 7th of March for trade deadline. So let's kick it over to him, and we'll be back soon. Okay, episode 12 of the Second Look Sports Podcast. We have on a special guest today, Alex Adams, covering the Ottawa Senators for Sportsnet. And a big day for the nation's capital team. We did discuss it offline. We didn't know if this would be a big splash from Steve Staios and the crew, but they did deliver on trade deadline Friday, March 7th. And we're going to jump right into one of the bigger trades of the day, and really the one that kind of kickstarted trade deadline morning for everyone, with the Ottawa Senators acquiring center Dylan Cozens, defenseman Dennis Gilbert, and a 2026 second round pick from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Jacob Bernard-Docker and Josh Norris. A hockey trade in a lot of essence. And one of the things that you highlight in your article as well, Alex, was this idea that it was the first time in history that two players with plus $7 million cap hits in Josh Norris and Dylan Cozens were exchanged for each other on NHL trade deadline day. So massive day all around. Just initial thoughts on that trade and kind of how that helps the Ottawa Senators moving forward.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is a bet, right? And you talk about two, $7 million contracts being traded on deadline day. Like, in essence, there's a reason why it doesn't happen, right? And I think I'm a big NBA fan, and a lot of times you see two big contracts getting traded for one another that aren't working on a specific team. And I think that's kind of what happened. Like, Josh Norris is a really good player. He scores a lot of goals. He's very good defensively, but he doesn't drive a lot of play. If you look at his metrics, most of his points come on the power play. And the opposite is said for Dylan Cozens in Buffalo, who has struggled, but does have a good year in him 2 years ago. Same with Josh Norris 3 years ago. So they both got paid at their heights and never have met them since. And I think, it's kind of a bet for both teams in terms of, okay, I think we can bring this guy in. He'll do better here. And we don't like kind of the asset that we have with our team and with that player. And I think that was the case for Steve Staios, is that Josh Norris is making $8 million for a long time, until 2030, and the same is the case for Dylan Cozens, except he's making $7.1 million. So I was very surprised to see a second round pick going to Ottawa. I would have thought that just on the surface it would be kind of almost a one for one with maybe salary filler, with JBD and Dennis Gilbert swapping teams. But I think it's a bet. Like, I think, they play the Rangers later today. I don't know when this is dropping. And you're gonna be putting in a new second line center in, like, almost some, not a must-win game, but if you win that game, you're in a pretty good chance, in a pretty good spot to make the playoffs. So I think for like the long-term future, Norris just didn't create a lot at 5-on-5, and I think that's why the Sens were, when your second line center doesn't produce at even strength, that's why the team is last in 5-on-5 goals. And Stales literally said, like, we wanted to address that area, and they did, with Cousins, who's much more of a playmaker, but isn't the same defensive player, isn't the same PKer. So it's going to be an interesting swap, but I think I get it from both sides. I think I like Ottawa's bet a little bit more, just because Ottawa is actually a pretty decent team, and Buffalo is still mired in just not even mediocrity, just a lot of losing culture. And if you
Yeah.
look at the players they've traded out, Jack Eichel, Sam Reinhart, Ryan O'Reilly, Brandon Montour, like, those guys have become. They were good in Buffalo, but the team was losing, and people were questioning, like, are they, like, can they win? And then they go somewhere else and they win, and Conn Smythe and everything. So I think that's, if you're looking at it from Steve Sayo's perspective, I'm like, get him out of Buffalo. He's been struggling. That culture is awful. Bring him to Ottawa. We're a good team. Brady Tkachuk will teach him how to fight. I don't know, but I think that's the bet Ottawa made, and I think for the most part it's a good bet.
So when we look at this return yesterday, when you first hear Dylan Cousins is going to Ottawa, like, my initial reaction would probably be a second round pick might be going to Buffalo. The fact that a second round pick and then Dennis Gilbert on top of that comes back to Ottawa, like, did Steve Staios cook on this deal and like fleece the Buffalo Sabres, do you think?
I, Fleece is a strong word. I think for the most part, I don't know how he got that. Like, I was thinking about it last night. I'm like, so you're talking to Kevin Adams, and you're like, okay, Josh Norris is good, but he's never healthy and doesn't, produce at 5-on-5. And Dylan Cousins is having like the worst year of his career, essentially. And you're like, okay, let's throw in a second round pick. Like, like, where does it, like, how did
Yeah.
it come to that point
Yeah,
in a
like
discussion?
that's kind of like when I looked at the return, I'm like, how did other teams not meet this? Like, or like want to do a deal around that?
Yeah, so I know what Elliot Friedman said, I think on 32 Thoughts, but I had said prior, was that Buffalo, if they were going to trade Cousins, they wanted like a player right now, right? And so there's not a lot of teams that could kind of trade a pretty, similar type player for Cousins. And I think that's why it's unusual that you see two $7 million players being traded for each other. But I think that's why it worked, was because they're both kind of down on their contract itself. Like, they're both good players, but for the price tag that they're making, it's not the perfect fit, and they're probably being overpaid. And so I think that's kind of where the mechanics of the deal came in. But I think it's a great question, Justin. Like, why was a second round pick involved? And I think that actually, we can talk about it later, but I think that really facilitated the other trade that Sens made. And I think that's where I, on the surface, when I saw the first deal, I'm like, okay, I get it. I don't know if they're a better team, but it makes sense. Dylan Cousins being swapped for
Yeah.
um, Josh Norris. But then when you see them bringing in Fabian Zetterlund, I'm like, okay, this makes way more sense. This is a very good deadline, and that really shaped my perspective of their Steve Staios's deadline and if he cooked or not. And I think overall, it makes more sense when you see all the moving parts.
Yeah, Alex, and you mentioned too that with Norris too, it's I think it's a little bit interesting because of his health. You mentioned how he hasn't been able to really play a full season since he's been in the NHL, and I think this year is his first year playing more than 50 games. I think since 2022 or 2021. So do you think that that's Buffalo maybe taking a more of a risk in saying, we think he's healthy now, we're going to get the best of him going forward, versus where Ottawa doesn't necessarily know kind of the situation around Cozens. He's been pretty healthy, but just hasn't performed. What do you think that Buffalo is really getting in Norris, and what have you seen from him this year to think that he's ready to kind of go 100% going forward?
Yeah, I mean he's been banged up a little bit this year. He's I think missed 8 or 9 games. Don't quote me on it, but not with shoulder related injuries. But yeah, he's still like he has two shoulder surgeries to the same shoulder like that. He's what's really poetic almost is his last goal as a Senator was on a one-timer against Chicago, and when he had his great year where he had 35 goals, he had a lot of one-time goals. So that was kind of his bread and butter. And that really hasn't been the same ever since those two injuries.
Right.
But he showed it a little bit on Wednesday. So I think if you're Kevin Adams, if I'm guessing is like I think right now Josh Norris this season has played better than Dylan Cozens, right? And the money isn't that different in terms of like a discrepancy between the salaries. He's a much better defensive player than Dylan Cozens is. But and he's not really a play driver like Cozens is, but I think that's the bet is like, hey, like Cousins is just not going to work out. We can get a second line center who can score, who's really good defensively, which that Buffalo team has really struggled to be a good defensive team. And I get it to some degree. Again, I don't get the second round pick, but I see where Kevin Adams is coming from. And, he for this season, he's on pace to play the most amount of games since that year he broke out in 21,
Yeah.
22. I think
Yeah.
he's on pace for like 70-ish games. So he's been healthy this year. So with no shoulder injuries or related injuries. So I think that's the bet for Kevin Adams. And it makes enough sense. But I still think they probably could have done something differently. And I think at the end of the day, they should be kicking themselves for kind of ruining a little bit Dylan Cousins' value because like I still remember I think it was in November when Elias Pettersson was kind of the rumors
Yeah.
started and Elliot Friedman on his podcast with Kyle, who I know pretty well here in Ottawa, floated like Cousins with Bowen Byram for Elias Pettersson, and like everyone was like, "That's not enough for Elias Pettersson." I think
Hmm.
now it
Hmm.
would
Oh
be,
yeah.
weirdly enough, but that just shows you kind of the value where he's at, and maybe he was still low at that time. That's why Canucks fans were up in arms about Friedge floating those two names, but it's I think it's Buffalo's a tire fire, and there's a reason why Dylan Cousins hasn't thrived. Also, a lot of other Sabres players have been much better when they've left.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good trade for both teams. I think for the most part.
So let's talk about the captain, Brady Tkachuk. Obviously emotional
Yeah.
yesterday after the trade. Were you there
hmm
so raw emotion, like what did you see out of Brady?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, before he came in, he walked kind of past us with Norris, just kind of behind us, like not in front of us, but they were like literally walking together behind the scenes in the locker room. And then he came out and from the get-go, you could tell he was really emotional. And I'm sure you guys watched the video. And
Hmm.
I don't besmirch a guy for, those guys have played together when they're at the U.S. development program when they were 16, 17-year-olds. They basically grew up together here in Ottawa as well. So, yeah, it's tough. And, they were really close. But Norris was a very well liked teammate, just being in the room all the time. Like the guys liked him. He's a
Hmm.
smart guy. He's good at giving little chirps here and there as well. But like him and Shabbat were very close. Pinto, him and Batherson were very close as well. So yeah, I think it's I can't blame a guy like I think it's especially you guys know like in the hockey world like hockey players don't really show emotions unless
Yeah.
it's anger and on the
Hmm.
ice, right?
Yeah.
And guys aren't really blunt about their lives and how it affects them. And I think we want more personality from guys. And for Brady Tkachuk to show it and to be raw and be on the verge of tears for losing his friend, if someone's calling him, whatever, like a baby or soft or whatever, I think that's dumb. And I also think it's dumb if people think this means that he wants to leave Ottawa. I think that's a whole lot of BS too. So, I think good for him. But, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to change too much. As long as Dylan Cozens is a good player here in Ottawa, I think Brady will be happy at the end of the day. And if they make the playoffs, I don't think he'll look back. But if they keep losing, he might say, "Well, why did you trade Norris?" I guess. But uh, they're in a good position right now to make the playoffs, and if they do it, I don't think there'll be any qualms from his side.
I was about to ask, I was gonna say, I was gonna have to ask, do you think that might be the first step of Brady leaving Ottawa? But good for you to shut
Yeah,
it down.
can I? Yeah, okay, like I get why. So like I'm on Sens Twitter essentially. Like I see it all,
Yeah.
and every like 2 weeks there's going to be either a Rangers site or Boston or St.
Yeah.
Louis that is like, okay, Brady Tkachuk wants to come here. Let's give Ottawa a first round pick, and they'll say yes. And obviously the Larry Brooks report and all that. At the end of the day, he has 3 years left on his contract after this year, if I'm not mistaken. I think if Ottawa wins and they make the playoffs consistently, he will not
Yeah.
want to leave. And if let's say they miss out this year and then next year we're at the deadline and they're like 6 points out and there's no real chance. I think that's when you start saying, okay, maybe he wants out. Like he hasn't made the playoffs and he's in his like eighth, ninth year in the league, and I would
Yeah.
not blame him for that either. But I do believe, unlike Matthew, that he signed a 7 year contract when the owner, let's say, was very different, and this
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
was very different than it is right now. And I think he's committed to Ottawa. But if they never make the playoffs during the duration of his contract, like why would you blame him for wanting to leave? So my take on it, and I think most people kind of around the team would agree, was like if they win, he will be happy. If they
Yeah.
keep losing, he won't be. And it's as
Yeah,
simple as that.
all he wants to do is win.
Yeah.
Alex, take it away.
Yeah, no, it is simple as that, and I think I've seen some reports, and you touched on it there. And Brady himself said before I get to this other trade, he said in that interview or that like stand up there, basically like it is a business, and I recognize it. It's just unfortunate, but
Hmm.
he's smart enough. He has his dad who's been in the league. He has his brother Matthew, and it seems as simple enough as look, if we win and we get some success here, I can see Josh, at another time. It's not like he's gone forever. In fact, he's not even really that far if you think about it. So I think ultimately, as simple as if we get some success, especially with the players brought in, and one of the players that'll introduce here, it's a win-win for hopefully everyone. And let's get to that trade. As a Sharks fan, I'm a little disappointed introducing this trade to you. I'll be honest, Alex, but Ottawa Senators not done after that Dylan Cozens deal. They brought in Fabian Zetterlund, left winger. They brought in Tristan Robbins and a 2025 fourth round pick from the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Zach Ostapchuk, Noah Gregor. He returns to San Jose again, and a 2025 second round pick. I think that was almost in some ways a little bit more surprising after seeing the Dylan Cozens deal. That was a surprise in and of its own. But then to see that Ottawa wasn't done, and obviously Steve Staios and the crew continued bringing in a young RFA in Fabian Zetterlund with a lot of success. So what does he bring to the lineup? And were you just as surprised to see this deal as you were earlier in the day to see that Cozens one?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if he was available. I don't know how you're feeling as a Sharks fan because I've looked down like Sharks Reddit and like trying to find like what the pulse of the fans have, and I don't think anyone's really been like, oh, I like
No,
it.
no.
Um, I don't. Claude Lemieux, his agent, said like they weren't kind of close on a contract extension in San Jose, and it seemed like that was the impetus. He was asking for like almost 3 million, which doesn't seem like that much, especially for San Jose when you have anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
Kicking me
get
when I'm
to the
down here.
Ottawa
No, I
side of
got
it.
you. You're right. It is great.
Yeah,
It
no,
is
no, no. I'm
interesting.
just I mean, I thought after when they got that second round pick, I'm like, okay, this from Buffalo. I was like, okay, they have
Mm.
another second round pick to work with. I feel like they're gonna make a trade to add. I didn't think it would be with 27 seconds left on the clock that Steos pulled the trigger, but I did expect them to some degree to add if it was a Ryan Donato or even if it was like a Beauvillier before he got traded, of course, or like even just like a mid lane type middle six player. But I think Zetterlund's almost the perfect fit. This team in Ottawa, like if you think about it, Giroux isn't fast, Brady Tkachuk isn't fast, Batherson's okay, but like Perron's slow, Amadio slow, like they're not a fast team, and I think that's been a reason why they've really struggled at 5-on-5 is just getting to, being able to really create offense off the rush and really just hem teams in, and get in transition. So Zetterlund's all that. He scores at 5-on-5. He's really fast. He's physical. Him and Cousins actually now are second and third on the Sens in hits. And I asked Steos a question about that, and he was like, "Yep, I kind of like that." So I think that's something that's part of their philosophy as well. Even though Zetterlund isn't a big player in terms of height, but he's pretty big. I think Biz called him like a cigarette. I forget what it
Yeah, oh
was.
yeah,
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 a cigarette
yeah.
machine or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I think he's a perfect fit in Ottawa. It'll be interesting to see if they try to extend him. I asked Deos yesterday, and he said, we don't have any contract negotiations. But at the end of the day, I think it's just a really good player that I think will be on the top six. I think it would make a lot of sense to put him with Stützle, although from what I've heard, he plays more on the left rather than the right. So maybe you um, flip him out for Brady and put him on the second line with maybe Cousins, which would be a pretty dominant duo as well. So I just really like the trade. Ostapchuk didn't really have a future in Ottawa. He was a second round pick from 2021, but I didn't like. I think he's an NHLer, but is he more than a fourth liner? And with Ottawa having so many centers, I just didn't see a fit. Gregor is salary filler, and a second round pick is, it's something, but it's not a first round pick. And you just got another second round pick, so you're basically flipping, like you're asset neutral. So I think it was a really good trade
Yeah.
from Steve Stamkos,
Like the first thing is like Anthony Bolivier went for a second round pick yesterday. Like, and to
and
think
he's a rental.
yeah, and you just got Zetterlund for a second round pick essentially. Like that to me is just beyond crazy. Good work by Steve Stais. But yeah, my question is, were you shocked that another forward was added and they didn't look to the defense to add anything back there?
No, I wasn't. This team's about 10th in the league in goals allowed. Underlying metrics show that that's not a farce. It's not just goaltending. Allmark's
Hmm.
actually, outside of 8 games, has been pretty bad, honestly,
Yeah.
numbers wise. It's not that I think their defense is perfect, but when healthy, they have a pretty good top four. Nick Jensen's been really good for Shabbat, who's having his best year of his career. Sanderson of late is just looking like a stud, especially offensively. I think since like January 23rd, he's like first or second in points from a defenseman. And he's such a good defensive player too. So I think it's their bottom pair. Could it get better? They brought in Gilbert. I don't love it, but he's another left shot defenseman to maybe swap with Clevin, who's right now hurt, but he might be coming back soon. They already had a bunch of guys on the right with Hamonic, who I don't think the Sens should be playing him, but they decide to do it, and they know my opinion on that. And they have Madden Paolo, who's kind of come out of nowhere and played for Finland at the Four Nations. So I think they have a good top four. The bottom pair could be a bit better, but that's kind of life in the NHL. But I think, when your team isn't scoring, but defending well, I think it's obvious that you need to add a forward. Could they could they get it better on defense in the offseason? I think of course. But I think it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to really make a big trade on the back end unless something came to fruition. But I think for the whole time you could tell it was adding scoring and adding to the forward group for Steve Stamkos.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And we saw, I'd say, at least on the deadline day, Ottawa was definitely the most aggressive team out of the kind of the four or five that are still chasing those wild card spots between Columbus and New York and Montreal, Detroit. New York, I guess, had been making moves throughout the season to make changes, obviously, but out of that group with Ottawa now and obviously Boston kind of selling off, how do you think their position now? I think most people would have given them a really strong chance to make the playoffs even before the deadline. How do you think they stack up now with the New Yorks and the Columbuses of the East now? And where do you think they're headed as we get down the race?
I, I think they're in a great spot. Like Detroit's free falling. Columbus is struggling and they have a tough schedule. They're playing a lot of good teams and they're a pretty good home team, but if I'm not mistaken, they're playing a lot. They have a more like road heavy schedule. But Ottawa will play Columbus three times in like 9 days to end the year. So
Huge.
you go 3-0, go 0-3, like that could have a huge outcome in terms of, affecting the playoff race, of course. So there's still, you never know, but I think them and the Rangers to me seem like the two teams that will sneak into the wild card,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be surprised if New Jersey drops into the wild
Yeah,
card
that's what I was
too.
about to
It's a
They
good point.
lost
or
last night to
drops
the
out.
Jets 6-1.
Yeah.
They're I think only 5 points behind Ottawa or ahead of
Yep.
Ottawa, and I think
Yep.
Ottawa has 3 games in hand. So like you go in a little bit of heater, you're right there, and they're losing, and they obviously lost Jack Hughes. So they're it's not the same team that was doing well to start the year. So I think there's a bunch of moving parts, but I think right now, as I see it, is New York and Ottawa who face off today are the two teams best primed to make those two spots. I think Columbus is such a great story, and I hope they make
Yeah.
it in if they can. But I don't believe in Detroit. Steve Yzerman made a weird trade too for a fourth
Yeah.
liner who wasn't on a bad team and a goalie, which I guess they need. But I think right now Ottawa and New York look like the two best teams. Boston's out of it. But Montreal, I kind of like Montreal, but they didn't add. They're on this West Coast swing. They've kind of been like Ottawa, like they win five in a row, they lose five in a row. But I just don't think they're as good enough defensively to hold up. And they
And
have a pretty tough schedule.
and also they lost Doc, so they don't have a
Yeah,
2C.
yeah, yeah,
They're literally playing Owen back as the 2C right now,
yeah,
so it's not formula to win down the stretch here, I
yeah.
don't think yet.
No.
But the one question I did want to ask about this is if the Sens do make the playoffs, the Atlantic Division is a gauntlet right now. So if we're looking at the playoffs and we're looking at the Atlantic Division, would you rather be in the if you're the Sens, would you rather be in the wild card or would you rather be in the 2-3? Because if you're in the wild card, you're probably matching up against Toronto, I would say. And then if not, I would say Florida and Tampa would be the other options.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Ottawa will be. You never know. But Tampa looks really good. Like I think their record's worse than who they actually are, and they got better at the deadline. Florida's a juggernaut. The Leafs, in my opinion, are the worst out of the three, but they're still a good team. And they have great goaltending. I I was thinking about it last night weirdly is like if they make it in, like I kind of want them to play Washington
Mm.
because
That
you
might
look
be
at the
good.
two teams, like it's gonna be Carolina who just traded Rantanen, New Jersey who doesn't have Hughes, or the Rangers who are a decent team, but I don't think are that good. And Washington, Ottawa's played them three times this year. All three games have gone to overtime.
Mm.
Um, and they seem to play well against Washington. So I kind of am like, if they come eighth and they play Washington, I can see a like, I'm not saying it's likely, but I
Yeah.
could see it happening. I do not like them against Florida or Tampa. I think the Leafs they'd win because it's the Leafs and the Ottawa's always had their number. But it would be a tough series and they should be the underdogs. But I don't think they'll make it to the divisional. At one point, I think they had a chance. They played Tampa twice in Tampa and lost. I think that's kind of where
Yeah.
the dream died for Sens fans who had hope to get into the three. But it's gonna be like I'm sure you guys know. It's like think about the Central Division right now. The two teams that would play each other is
Oh man.
Colorado and
Yeah.
Dallas, and
Yeah,
then it would be
Yeah.
it's
Tampa and
I think
Florida or
Florida.
I
Toronto.
think it's
Either way,
Toronto right
like
now. Yeah.
yeah, and that's
Crazy.
just like those are probably four of the best 8 or 9 teams in the league, and one's going to be out in the first, or two will be out in the first round. So I really think for Ottawa, the better position is to be a wild card team if you're in the Atlantic, because no matter what, you're going to have a gauntlet in the first round if you get into the third wild card. So they're really in a good position. And for the Leafs' sake, I do hope that they can win the division and at least not have to play like Florida or Tampa again. So yeah.
It would be a great battle of Ontario if the situation did come to it for Ottawa's first in the last few years, but we'll see what happens in that sense. Just the last one for me. We talked about the fact that you'd rather play Washington, and we talked about the gauntlet of an Atlantic division. A question not related to Ottawa, but seeing Brad Marchand in a Florida Panthers jersey is going to take some getting used to. Just thoughts on seeing that go down the pipeline, especially get that player traded in division to a rival. What are your just thoughts when you first saw that come across the timeline?
It's the all rat line, isn't it? Like
Yeah, it
him,
really is.
Kachuk, Bennett, and then playing the Leafs. Like I almost want to like fall over. Like I just would, I'd pay so much money to watch that. I think, I mean, I listened to 32 Thoughts last night. It seems like like Marchand, like the only team he wanted to go to was Florida, which is really interesting considering they've been Boston the last 2 years, and I think that's why the return was so low. Um, but yeah, craziness. I really thought when Vegas said hi that was where he was gonna
Yeah,
go,
for
and I'm like,
sure.
oh my God,
Stir in the pot.
I can't do this.
yeah.
But
Vegas with the ultimate troll job yesterday.
Stir in the pot.
Great
they
job by
didn't
the
even do
admin.
anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Great job
Yeah.
by the social admin. Last question before we wrap this up. Overall, what's your overall grade for the Ottawa Senators on their deadline day?
I think it's an A. I think, the thing that kind of holds me back from an A plus is like they did just bring in Cousins for Norris, and I think that on the surface is a downgrade, and just you throw in a little bit of a wrinkle of like, okay, well, how does he mesh with like what Norris is like with Batherson and Perron, like they or with Giroux, like there is some like built-in chemistry just like on the ice. I don't even mean
Mhm.
with everything with Kachuk. And you're throwing them into like the biggest game of the season, and they play Detroit. So
Yeah.
like I could see how it goes badly, and then you're like, holy shit, like we lost the two biggest games because we made this trade. But I think on the surface, I get it. I think they needed a play driver, which just you look at Norris, it's like his Corsi, his expected goals, it's like it's not good. Even though he's played with decent players, and
Yeah.
he's a good PKer, and they'll lose that too. But I think what made me really like their deadline is basically you create cap space and you get Zetterlund. Like that
Yeah.
that trade to me is an A plus
Mhm.
and is exactly what they need. And you basically add another middle six, in a sense, top six forward that scores and is fast, which is exactly what the team needed. And obviously you swap out Norris for Cousins, but I think overall the team is way better on the offensive side of I guess on the offensive side of the puck. And I think it was a really shrewd moves. And I think moving forward, that's also too, where like I think this team's in a much better position for next year and the year after next than they were before the deadline. So I think it was a win now move and a move for the future. And I think that's why I really like their deadline.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hopefully they do win now and they are successful down the stretch and end the playoff drought for the last couple of years. So, Alex, thank you first and foremost for joining us. A big day for the Sens, probably a big day for you as well. And hopefully we see, as people that are right now residing in Ontario, I think we're all really rooting for the Sens to make that push. And thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll see some success down the line.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. And I'm hoping for a Leaf Sens first round. That's what my employer would like, and that's what I would like. So
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm hoping for that. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
And welcome back Great conversation with Alex. He's obviously super dialed into the Sens. And when we originally booked him, we were thinking, I wonder how crazy the Sens are going to go on deadline day. Are they going to be quiet? Are they going to kind of let that Atlantic dictate what they do? But they were in there. And in all honesty, the Sens made the biggest splash early. I was driving and I saw, okay, well, when I parked, I should say, I wasn't driving and like scrolling Trade Center, but I saw like the
No,
Kuzmenko deal.
you just put yourself in the
No, like I
you
pulled in,
caught
I
red
pulled
handed.
in.
Citizens arrest.
Yeah,
Citizens
you
arrest.
just threw
Yeah, take
yourself
me out
under
of
the
here.
bus.
I glanced at the phone for like 2 seconds and was like,
Oh,
okay, I'll
really?
check. I'll check when we
Really?
get home. Because I saw the Kuzmenko deal and I was
Uh,
like, all right, that's fine. You know, Kuzmenko going to LA and then parked, pulled out the phone and immediately saw like the Sens deal for Cousins. And I'm thinking, this is wild. This is the real deal that kicked off the trade deadline. And then from there on, we saw like, you know, like you said, Justin, in the first segment there, just a domino effect of trades in the Atlantic to Central. Any trades that come to mind that like really define a team and are going to be successful moving forward here? Or does anyone have like a place to kind of take this early on?
uh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I
Go
think it's
for it.
pretty obvious.
The Mikko
Uh,
Rantanen deal?
I no,
What do you mean no?
no. What do you mean the Mikko Rantanen deal? Come on, think about it. Define a team, and you add them at the deadline.
Just
Brad
enlighten me,
Marchand.
Justin.
Brad Marchand. When that deal came across the table, like, okay, first you're thinking no way that Boston's actually going to trade their captain. And then second, when you know what it looks like at even 8 minutes before the deadline, oh, there's no way he's going. He's staying. Like it is what it is. And then Vegas enters the chat and says hi. Like you're thinking, okay, maybe Vegas. Maybe Vegas. Okay, that's the only logical option. And then Elliot goes on the air. Yeah, so it looks like Boston's going to be trading Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers. And like I'm just like Leafs fans, I am so sorry for you because you thought you just killed the Bruins. And then they're like, nope, we're gonna send them to the team that's probably gonna eliminate you in the playoffs because that is the most perfect fit I've ever seen in terms of a trade. Like there is no better fit. Mikko Rantanen, sure, the Finnish players, like there is no better trade that was for in terms of fit for the Florida Panthers and Brad Marchand. Like when
Yep.
that trade happened, my instant reaction was like, you can't be doing this. Like there's no way. There's just no way that this is happening.
I mean, I felt bad for Bruins fans for sure. Like I think everyone expected um, that Brad Marchand was going to be on the market and was going to be shopped a little bit, but I don't know that people really had it in their hearts that it was going to actually happen. There had been like some small rumors over the last few weeks that maybe, following Four Nations, that maybe, he would be a fit in Florida and everyone could see it. So I think you're right, Justin. It does perfectly encapsulate kind of the deadline and exactly what teams are looking to do and try to find those type of fits. Dallas took a bigger swing and obviously brought in a guy that has had some trouble in his most recent spot. But I think that trade going forward, obviously, unless Florida were to go on and win the cup again, which is definitely a possibility, I think the trade for Rantanen will be something that people look at more in terms of how it all ends up and how his tenure now goes in Dallas and what happens with his contract and how that changes the dynamics of the team. And it certainly was something that took a lot longer to kind of percolate and was still surprising in itself when I think Frege sent out that tweet on Thursday night, very late Thursday night, saying, hearing that it could be, or basically saying that Dallas had entered the
Yeah,
chat.
that ruined
Um,
my whole like
yeah.
sleep schedule. That was just yeah, that
So
just
I
killed
think
it.
those two trades in tandem kind of put together that look of like that's exactly what the NHL trade deadline is about. It's about
Yeah.
teams trying to make changes for the short term and try to go for it and win the Stanley Cup regardless of the situation. But it's also teams looking long term, trying to settle in and put together a group of guys that they can work with for a long period of time, obviously too. So I thought it was a perfect trade deadline in that way, and I loved both of those deals. I thought both teams did very well.
So okay, Dylan Cozens trade happens, and I see the return. I'm like, I'm just thinking from a Leafs fan, like obviously, I'm Montreal. I like the Habs. I really didn't think going for Dylan Cousins at this point was a smart move. I just there's not any reason to go for it at this point. If you got a good deal for it, like sure, go for it. But if you're Toronto, I'm like, how did you not get a better offer out for this guy? Like you should have just offered Cowan and like maybe Nick Robertson and a second round pick or something like that. Like it didn't seem like that big of a return going back to Buffalo. And then, so at that point, I was like, everyone in Toronto must be like on edge right now with Brad Treliving. Then he makes the Lawton deal, and he doesn't give up Minton in that one. I thought for sure Minton had to go in that one. He doesn't give up Minton, he gives up Gurbankin, which is a great move. I thought the Scott Lawton deal was a great move. Then like 2 minutes after the Brad Marchand on from out underneath the like if you're thinking WWE, it's like Undertaker like he comes up behind you like music and like Brad Treliving just goes, yeah, so we're gonna get Brandon Carlo. Yeah, like this is the best defense the Toronto Maple Leafs have ever had when going into the playoffs. Like this is a legit Stanley Cup top four now, and I don't know. I really don't know how this works, but do you think like Brad knows that Marchand is being traded to the Florida Panthers at the same time he's trying to make a deal to get a defense, or do you think like he learns about that deal and he's just like whatever's like going through his mind about like, do I really give up Minton here? He's just like, yeah, we have to go give up Minton now in like 30 seconds. Like, what do you guys think?
I don't know. I know that like when going in, Brad Living makes. I think they. I know that James Duffy had said this. I think on the TSN side, like Brad Living has made a trade pretty much every trade deadline. I know he's pretty quiet. He's close to the. He's pretty much in on everything, and that was pretty clear throughout like the deadline and understanding like there's no way Brad Living sits here and doesn't do anything. Like that would be basically a disservice to Leafs fans and the team really after the Austin Matthews comments of wanting to bring someone in. But I think you have to think like anybody in terms of a prospect should have been on the table. I know a lot of Leafs fans often like cower, and it's one of those weird things where it's like, oh, well, I want the guy, but we really got to hang on to the Cowens and the Mittens of the world. And then when you look at the way that the trade market goes, that's not possible. You saw some of the players that were traded. Bavilier gets traded for a second to kick off the day, and you're like, all right, we're off to the races here. We're getting rid of everybody. It sucks losing a guy like Minton in that Brandon Carlo trade because Minton is going to be like a solid maybe like a solid third line center for a lot of his career. I don't know if his offensive upside moves him up the lineup any more than that, but you still need players like that to be successful for playoffs and Stanley Cup stretches. But really, like, I think it was a great move by him. And ultimately, I guess the question is, would you rather have gotten rid of Cowan or Minton? And I think you can have an argument about that on a separate conversation. It really just depends on what the acquiring team would have preferred. And in this case, it was Minton to the Boston Bruins. But from what the Leafs gaining a player for multiple years, what $4.1 million cap hit, I think, in Brandon Carlo, you can finally fill out that those six defensemen on a left and right tandem. I don't know the last time the Leafs have been able to do that, a left and right for the all three pairings. So even that in of itself, and having a young guy who has killed the Leafs in the past, that's the craziest part of all this is seeing these Atlantic moves like back and forth. It's just crazy to see Marchand on the Bruins and Carlo on the Leafs. Like Bruins were like, we're not making the playoffs. We don't even care. All that to say, Justin, I think he probably saw the writing on the wall. You have to get rid of a Minton or a Cowan to be successful. And I think Brad Treliving, arguably the Scott Laughton deal was better, but the Brandon Carlo was the icing on the cake for the Leafs.
Oh yeah, it was good. It was just like, do you think like Brad knew? Like, do you think Brad knew
I don't
like
know.
Marchand's going to Florida?
I don't know.
I tend to think he maybe didn't know specifically in that moment. I'm sure he had known that that was a possibility, that there were rumors, whatever we know, he probably knows a little bit more. But I think in that moment, around that time, it was obvious that Boston had made a like kind of consensus decision that okay, we're going to move off these guys. We're gonna, it was pretty late in the day with that those trades started to really, it seemed like, pick up steam. So I think there was some point in the day where they had just decided and they were trying to hold steady to increase the price, but at some point they decided okay, we're going to pull the trigger on these things, and kind of obviously first with Marchand kind of let him go, and then that seemed to um, spur on whether it was at that point they were like, okay, we're going to do the Carlo deal as well, or maybe the Leafs were working on other things as well that just didn't pan out. But I find it, if Treliving knew right away, I don't know how he did. Maybe he's got a plant in the Bruins locker room or something, or in their front
Well,
office. But
he might have been in on Marchand. Like he was probably in on
yeah,
Marchand up until the end, and then like just learned like, hey, he's going to Florida. Do you want Carlo?
maybe.
Like,
Maybe. I don't know.
Well,
It depends, I guess, how hard they were pushing for Lawton. Because, I mean, at that point, I don't think they were going to. I know there were talks that they wanted to get upgraded in probably every position other than goalie. But they were definitely in on a center and I think obviously a defenseman. I don't know how hard they were pushing for a winger. So whether or not they were involved in Marchand, they probably had talks. I just don't know how deep they got.
yeah, that's fair.
With Boston. But you're 100% right. I think they definitely had an idea what was going on, and whether or not all those things kind of set off a chain reaction, I can't be certain of, but I think you're 100% on the right track there.
yeah, I think
Like,
Brad
just
Marchand
sorry.
had the power here, right? Like he only really
That's
wanted to
also a good
win.
Yeah,
point.
yeah, he
Like
wanted.
I I just can't see him wanting to be like it's such we've seen it with like a Marian Hossa in the past where like from Pittsburgh to Detroit, Detroit to Pittsburgh just to try and chase the cup. Eventually got one in Chicago. And Brad Marchand has one, so that's understandable early in his career, but like I still think it's crazy to think that he would be like, "Yeah, you know what? Let's go to Toronto." Even if it is for 3 months. Like you're basically you're not burning the bridge in Boston because he's done so much for the city, but you're putting a little stain on the love that they have for you going to the rival. Now, even going to Florida is a little bit weird. A lot of people seem to think
Yeah,
he's going to re-sign in Boston, so is it really a huge deal? But I think you maybe alluded to it
I don't
earlier,
think he
Brandon. Like
is.
I don't know if they
I
go on
don't
a
think.
run, right? He might stick around.
Yeah,
I really don't think
maybe.
he's staying in Boston or going back to Boston. Like from what I saw and what I heard yesterday is the gap is way too large. Don Sweeney kind of screwed that up pretty good. Didn't like Brad Marchand saw everyone else getting paid. Um, and he thought like, hey, when my time, because he's been on a team friendly deal for like 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
and he thought when it's my time, I'll get compensated for, it, like
Yeah.
paid for. And Don Sweeney just basically said, "Yeah, we're not paying for the past at all. We're just paying for the future." And the rumored offer is $3 million a year. $3 million a year for Brad Marchand, who has like 47 points in like 50 games this year.
Yeah, if
Like
that's the case, that's
that
tough.
that is that is a ridiculous offer if that is the official offer. In my
Now,
personal opinion, that is so disrespectful to him. That is
well,
so disrespectful.
this sounds like a carbon copy of Stamkos last year. Like, in different contexts, they're different players, but different, like similar type ages. What Stamkos is just a little younger, so I guess it's a little bit different. But like, it is like you kind of throw this, and this is I haven't heard any of this, so this is just speculation. But if that's the case, and you're lowballing him, and then Brad Marchand goes, okay, well I'll go sign elsewhere and get my bag, and then you see the season that Stamkos and the Predators are having. Maybe the grass is not always greener. Maybe it's like he wants to retire as a Bruin for as long as possible. Now that is tainted, but ultimately, like, well, he's going to remember it as a Bruin. I wonder where this goes. I really wonder, but the next 3 months will tell what direction the Panthers go. And if they make a run, if they win, like, why would he not rejoin that team, especially with guys like
Oh,
Bennett and Tkachuk
yeah,
there?
like
Oh, well, maybe not Bennett, but
man,
Tkachuk.
it's so that team like who wouldn't want to live there? Like Florida like 10 years ago didn't have a clue what they were doing, and then they finally learned like, hey, Tampa Bay, you actually set the blueprint for us to copy. And now that they copied it, they're like, okay, now we become one of the best teams in the league that can do this year after year after year. because we know how to use our money. We know how to get guys to come. We know how to get them to sign for less because you know what? It's a no income state tax, so we can really do
Yep.
that. Um, so yeah, it's just to me like the Florida Panthers have to be the biggest winners of the deadline, I would say. Getting Seth Jones as well, Nico Stearns, getting deeper down the middle. Then they add Brad Marchand, and then they're also gonna get Matthew Tkachuk back. Who's not even in the lineup. It's just yeah, man. They're like Florida Dallas final is just like in the cards. I think like when you think about it, like they get still Heiskanen and Sagan on the IR as well in Dallas, like to come back. Like it's ridiculous. And like sorry, this is not a deal or trade that happened yesterday, but this extension is beyond team friendly. Like this is an absolute steal. Wyatt Johnson for 8.4 million for the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's a
Are
great
you
deal.
kidding me? Like that is ridiculous. The guy could be making 13. I did hear like they were really worried about the offer sheets this summer. A lot of teams are apparently going to be throwing them out there. Wyatt Johnson would have been a one name that everyone would have wanted. So to get him locked up for another 5 years at 8.4 is just, it's a remarkable job. Like Jim Neal, sorry, give him the GM of the year. Just give it
It
to
was,
him.
it was a great move. I think it's fair we have to talk about Mikko Rantanen, just in terms of like the whole saga. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but just in terms of the trade, Carolina made out okay. I think comparatively to what a lot of people were thinking they would get in return if they were to move him. Sending Mikko Rantanen to Dallas, they got Logan Stankoven in return, two conditional first round picks, both first picks for 2026 and 2028 are top 10 protected, a 2026 third and a 2027 third as well. So a lot of people online were saying that they were like, oh, Carolina did as well as they could. It was pretty good for what they got. I know, but we were praising Eric Tulsky for making this deal 2 months ago, and his stock immediately dropped a week before the deadline. So let's not forget the situation he put himself in here. I'm curious what you guys thought of the deal and maybe just this whole saga and how it played out for Mikko Rantanen after the extension as well.
Brandon, you have
Well,
to say it. You have to say it.
I don't know what you're talking about, but what I was going to say is that I think that first of all, I was listening to Elliot Friedman was on Real Kipper and Born last night, and he did, I
Mm-hmm.
think, a fantastic job of breaking down exactly how this trade kind of happened from Thursday night into Friday. And I think Dallas made out really well. I think that they did exactly, I think, what they it seemed like planned to do. They had a clear picture to get him signed, to get him in the building, and to make sure that he was going to be there. And I liked the fact that they had kind of two separate offers going, whether or not they were going to get him signed. They were going to have him as a rental regardless, and they had the deal in place apparently with Carolina to make sure that that happened. But I think it's just crazy that Carolina comes out looking like they don't know what they're really doing. I think they didn't plan when they picked up Rantanen. I don't think their plan was, okay, we're going to improve our draft stock in the future and we're going to come out with Taylor Hall and we're going to make it look like we didn't really plan out what was going to happen. I think their intention was to get Rantanen signed after they got him in the building, but once it was clear that he was still undecided, I think they should have been a little bit more, um, I guess, just quicker in terms of trying to accumulate more assets now, instead of kind of waiting till the last second. I do like the
Yeah.
draft capital that they picked up, but I think after all the mess and hearing after Tulsky, and maybe this is what you're referring to, Justin, about Tulsky saying that he didn't feel like he had enough time after dealing with Rantanen for so long to make any more significant moves. I think to me I know he's a rookie GM, but that's almost a near fireable offense because
There it is.
Yeah.
you're
There it is.
basically
There it
saying
is.
you're basically
Yeah.
saying that you're not capable of doing the job that you're put in place to do. You're not able to handle multiple things at the same time. He was basically saying, I was so caught up with this thing that I wasn't able to improve our team in a more significant way now. And I think unless they make a big splash in the offseason, we'll have to just see what happens. I don't think anyone's confident about their playoffs right now. I don't know how you can be. So a
I,
mess.
I do have to give a little bit of credit to Carolina. Just Tulski in general. I do think like he screwed up massively. But if you're telling me the two offers here, either Martin Necas, Jack Drury in a second round pick, or Logan Stankoven, two firsts and two thirds. I'm taking the second offer all day long. They got a much better offer than what Colorado did for Mikko Rantanen, in my opinion. And yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. I don't think that those picks are going to stay in Carolina. I think they're going to turn into another star player probably in the offseason. And the one thing I did hear this, I think on 32 Thoughts last night, is he never actually got a chance to really see Carolina as well. He
Yeah.
was there for 43 days. Most of the time they were on the road. They barely played at home during that stretch. And then you also have Four Nations as well. And you're expecting him to decide on whether or not he wants to commit to 8 years living in that city. Like that's not a lot of time. And like after having your world like
Turned
flipped
upside
upside
down.
down,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like the basically the Colorado Avalanche calling bluff or like them calling bluff on the Colorado Avalanche saying like, hey, like we're gonna trade you if you're not willing to sign, and like they're like, okay, well, we'd be willing to sign in Carolina, but like we don't really believe that you're saying that because Elliot was talking about it. This is a tactic that some teams use to get guys to sign sometimes, and they're usually just bluffing. Um, and they called the bluff, and they actually dealt him away. Like it was very shocked. Like he was very shocked to be moved to Carolina in the first place. And yeah, it's just to me, I'm just thinking about this deal overall, and I think the real loser is Colorado in the end. The real loser is Colorado. I think at the end of the day, Carolina comes out with Logan Stankoven, a great young player, probably going to be better than Nietzsche's, and two first round picks and a bunch of and a couple thirds. But if you're Colorado, when in your wildest world did you ever think when you traded him to Carolina, he'd be coming back to sign 8 years and come
Yeah.
back to the
That's a fair
Central
point.
Division and come back and play against you in the playoffs every
I
year?
was
Like,
wondering where you were
that
gonna go
is the
with
point.
this. I was wondering. I was like, I don't understand how Colorado's the loser here. Now I full circle. I'm back with you. I know that's gonna be so brutal when Miko plays
Like,
against
that
you
is the
and
most brutal
scores
part.
six. Yeah,
Like that
yeah.
is the worst part about this thing. Like
Yeah.
you send them away to the Eastern Conference, and you're like, okay, we can handle not playing him until like a Cup final, whatever, or like play him twice a year. Nah, nah, nah. Now he's back in the division, and he
Boomerang.
chose to go back into the division. Like he wanted to be back into the division, and sign for 8 years, and then probably go beat you in the playoffs. Like that to me is the craziest part about this deal.
You had no state tax
No,
again in Dallas, right? There's so
yeah.
much to it than
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah.
No, that's the whole point is like I think Colorado knew that it might eventually end up whether it was this offseason or not. Like Dallas they had to have kicked it around that maybe in the summer he would end up there because it seems like Rantanen knows some of the players there. I think he said that he knows the area pretty well. So I think they must have had some clue that maybe they were one of the teams, but I think you're 100% right. They probably sent him to Carolina specifically. In order to hope that he would get a long-term deal. And Carolina, even though they said they had a plan to get him signed, it just goes to show that Colorado, I think, was a little bit more steadfast in what they were trying to do. A lot of the guys they went and brought in, I'm sure they had been working on since they traded Rantanen away. And I like a lot of the pieces that they got back. If you take out Rantanen, Casey Middlestat, and then you kind of add in what they got back in Brock Nelson, really like Charlie Coyle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they
it,
did really like they're one of the best contenders
yeah,
in the league
Yeah,
right now.
they
I
did a
think
Like
it was
lot.
just having a plan. Yeah,
yeah,
and I like it. Yeah.
they flipped their entire roster. It's really impressive. Like we looked at them at the top beginning of the season, and I think all three of us said like good team,
Not
but
as deep.
very top heavy,
Top
like
heavy.
very top heavy. And now they're deep. Like they have one of the best center groups in the entire league now. and it's really impressive. I know we're soon running out of time. I don't know if we're gonna do another call or not, but can we just spend like a minute here on like the Nick Kypreos thing from after the trade deadline from the Maple Leafs
Yeah,
side?
I do want to go into the Leafs a little bit more.
Yeah, so maybe we should take a break and then come back and wrap this thing up with a couple more trade talks from yesterday. Wild trade deadline. There's just so much to unpack, and then we have to touch on this Nick Kypreos Leafs package because I think it's absolute bull crap. I really do, and I want to talk about it.
All right, we'll take a quick break, hit you back up with some Leafs and wrap things up. So we'll see you in a second. And welcome back to wrap up as sort of a final segment here. We're going to get into some of the Toronto Maple Leafs moves that they made at the deadline, and then just sort of wrap up trade deadline with some winners and losers, just based off one day of action. I know things can change as the remaining schedule kind of comes down the pipeline here, but the Leafs did make a couple of good moves, bringing in Scott Laughton, bringing in Brandon Carlo, and maybe we'll just kind of get into thoughts on like how those trades sort of materialize, or just what our thoughts on it. I know, Justin, you wanted to kind of jump right in to start off though on trades that didn't happen for the Toronto Maple Leafs in a package for Mikko Rantanen. So if you want to jump in on that real quick and thoughts on it, let's start there.
Yeah, so like Nick Kypreos afterwards goes on Real Kipper and Born, his show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan and TV, I believe, or just
Yep,
whatever.
yeah, Sportsnet.
Uh, so he goes on there. First thing he says is like the Toronto Maple Leafs had a deal in for Mikko Rantanen. Like they were fully in there. And they had an internal clock. It seemed that internal, it wasn't like an official time, but it seemed like that official time or unofficial time was around noon Eastern, because that's when they started to move on Scott Laughton, and then they started working on Brandon Carlo from that point. Um, so the unofficial package that Nick Kypreos was reporting was Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, and two first round picks. And his argument was not only did the Carolina Hurricanes not want to send him to the Toronto Maple Leafs because it was an Eastern Conference matchup and they didn't want to meet him in the playoffs, was also he thought that the package was better. I don't know what he was looking at, but the package to me wasn't even close. Like Dallas's package is so much better. So much better. First two third round picks, two first round picks, and Logan Stankoven. I'm sorry, but Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton aren't anywhere close to the level of Logan Stankoven in terms of an actual player prospect. And Logan's actually in the NHL right now, whereas Minton and Cowan are still playing in the AHL and junior. So how does that package, you know, I guess entice the Hurricanes is my question because they wanted a player like if well, Carolina obviously we said like they came out okay considering what happened. But if you really wanted to come out like a loser Carolina, you take the Toronto deal because then you have no players to show for you coming back this season to actually play. At least you have Stan Copen here now. Like that is the most like it's just that Kiprio's deal is just like it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense why he would think that is the best deal on the table for Mikko Rantanen when there was obviously a much better deal in Dallas.
Yeah, I think if you look at the quality or what we know about the specifically, I think people look to the comparison between Easton Cowan, what he could be potentially, and what Stan Coven has already shown that he probably will be in the NHL. So I do agree with you. I think the Dallas package was a little bit more attractive in terms of getting back kind of a surefire asset that you know is going to be somebody that you can keep on your team for a long time and build someone to continue to build around. But I'll give Nick credit. Like I think two kind of prospects. The Leafs one and two number in terms of ranked prospects. Cowan and Minton would have been their top two prospects. Two firsts. It is a pretty comparable deal if you're just talking about kind of the assets and what they represent. to what Dallas gave up. Obviously, the third round picks kind of make up for the additional player or prospect because you know a little bit more about them. But I think you're right. Like I think the Stankoven deal was probably the more attractive one, and I probably would have taken that one as well. Not to say that the Leafs didn't offer a great package if that's what it came down to, but I do probably prefer what Dallas offered a little bit more.
Just to sort of wrap it up there, I think what I could see both sides of the spectrum. I think when you look at Carolina, and they've been in the playoffs for a while, but they've been the team that like bridesmaid never a bride. So they make it far enough where teams and players going into the next season are thinking this is the team that's going to compete and can actually win the cup. And even going into this year, I think they had a lot of people thinking that they were, top spot outside of Dallas, which ironically was the team that, ends up with Mikko Rantanen at the end of this with an extension. But you look at that Metropolitan Division, and right now Carolina will be playing New Jersey. I don't know how long that'll be, if that turns into a Columbus or what the case is, but Carolina can easily dispose of ideally that first team. And then you're going again against Washington, and you need players to be ready for playoff action. Logan Stankoven, he played last year, I think, in the playoffs a little, but obviously hasn't had a ton of experience. But obviously, Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton don't have any playoff experience. So Carolina is in position to win now. They're less in a position to win now based on the debacle that was the Mikko Rantanen situation without Netchis and Jack Drury, who's a great piece that they got rid of. But now you're bringing in Logan Stankoven, and again, you're making out with the best deal possible with a proven player. Now, some of those picks are top 10 protected, but like the Leafs picks would probably have been very similar for the first round picks. They wouldn't have been high to begin with. So I'm taking the Dallas package, and then the idea that Mikko Rantanen is now out of your hair, at least to the Stanley Cup Finals. If Dallas makes it that far, that's kind of icing on the cake. But tough one all around, and here we are.
The last thing on this Mikko Rantanen thing is obviously that package that was reported, you would have to assume that was a package where you're gonna get Mikko Rantanen on an extension, not a rental. So
Yeah.
if that is the case, he signed for 12 million in Dallas. Would not assume that's the case in Toronto. I would assume it's 14 million dollars a season. And if that is the case, you might as well kiss Mitch Marner goodbye at that point, which that's a toss up if you want Mitch Marner or Mikko Rantanen, that's up to you. But like, do you realistically, what do you think the number would have been? Do you think it's 14? Do you like, because you know it's more than 12 what he signed in Dallas.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think, Brandon?
I think for me, I think you're right. You're on the right track, Justin, for sure. It's hard to know exactly what it would take in terms of the difference between the Toronto market, the Dallas market. You've got tax issues, everything like that comes into play. But I actually, for that reason alone, I like more what the Leafs did yesterday than if they had
Yeah.
brought in Ranton. I think there would have been obviously a level of excitement for a fantastic player, one of the best players in the NHL for sure. But I think it would just add a little bit of cloud and mystery and confusion around what is going to happen with Mitch Marner. I'm not saying I would rather have one or the other. I think it helps to have the chemistry and have been on the team for as long as Mitch has. And I think
Yeah.
a large number of the Leafs fans and I think the hockey community in general do believe that Mitch Marner will be back, but bringing in Rantanen would just have made it much more difficult and would have obviously set off quite the storm in terms of the media coverage and the questions around the whole situation. And also like it might have not given them the opportunity to go out and make some of the more depth pieces that they got. And I love the Lawton deal, love the Carlo deal. I think they're very well positioned now to compete with some of the best teams in the East and really take a run that they maybe have only had a chance to do one other time. Maybe that with the Ryan O'Reilly deal, I think that's when
Yeah.
people felt the most confident about this team. Yeah, I can't complain. It seems like Treliving was in on all types of avenues and was just trying to give the team the best chance to really be a top team and compete for a cup. So I can't complain about that, but I don't know that I would have been as just satisfied with Rantanen. I think it would have just created a little bit more anxiety and confusion around the
You
Oh
whole
yeah.
think
situation.
So much so.
so you think he would have made less than, or you think he would have been around $14 million dollars a season or no?
I think if he was coming to Toronto, I think he would probably be in the 13.5 to 14
Yeah.
million dollar range.
I
Yeah.
would say
So
13.5
that's
would be
ex
my guess too.
Exactly, and that's probably what Mitch Marner is going to say now. He's not because like you can't say as Toronto you can't say oh Rantanen signed for 12 so you have to
Yeah.
sign for 12.
Well, that's what I was going to say is like, do you think that this changes either A, Mitch Marner's camp, or B, the Toronto Maple Leafs and how they look at this deal? Or do you think the teams that's a completely separate entity and they're still potentially, hopefully talking or negotiating
Well,
in their own kind of bubble?
the thing I'm thinking is like you have to do your due diligence, and it always will add a little bit of a caveat to Mitch Marner's camp to think, okay, well, this is a comparable player. What throws a wrinkle to it a little bit, and I don't know a lot of the specifics, but he's signing in a tax-free state, so it's kind of hard to compare when if he's signing in Florida, if he's signing in Dallas, if he's signing in like is I don't know if Tennessee, maybe not Nashville. I can't remember some of them off the top of the head that are tax free, maybe Arizona or something. But like for that being said, that definitely throws a little bit of a wrinkle into it. Now the
Yeah,
difference here is too like it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. In the Leafs' perspective, that's the one thing I wanted to say is you're bringing in Mikko Rantanen, who is great in Colorado against or playing with Nathan MacKinnon. Yes, Austin Matthews is a comparable player in terms of skill level. Nathan MacKinnon is head and shoulders above Matthews, in my opinion, but that's another story for another day. Still like Matthews' game, but you're still putting Rantanen with players that haven't played with him before versus Mitch Marner, who I know hasn't had as much playoff success relative to his regular season. He still has some decent playoff success comparative to other Leafs players over the past few years. But you still know Mitch Marner's game. He's so much better on a two-way game, penalty kill power play. He plays a ton of minutes. And Mikko Rantanen has just been down in Carolina. I know the trade kind of affected him. Maybe he'll thrive in Dallas now that he has an extension and he's comfortable and hopefully a city he gets a chance to spend more time in. But it's hard to give a player like that 13-5. And then you have Mitch Marner, who clearly would be walking away. I know he might already test free agency as it stands now. That's some of the reports. But I think being able to just say, well, we have Mitch Marner, let's focus on that. It's way too much bringing in Mikko Rantanen and having a pivot this quickly. I just think that's a debacle from the Leafs perspective, if that's the case.
It's funny too,
I don't
because
know.
I think Rantanen, I think, is the type of player that you would want to play with Mitch Marner. And I think the fact that there's so much, nobody really knows what's going to happen there. I think that's something too that you can kind of feel good about. I don't necessarily know that Austin Matthews lining up with Mikko Rantanen next year with Matthew Nyes say that's the first line, like, and Marner's gone. I don't know that I love that fit. I like that Rantanen is a big, strong player who's gonna go to the net. He's got a great shot. Like there are lots of things to love about him, but that's kind of Austin Matthews too. So if you're fitting them in together, I think you need almost that playmaker level type or who can get these guys the puck. And Mitch, maybe that would be a first line potential. I don't know, but like Mitch Marner would be a great fit with probably Mikko Rantanen. But you just at this point you don't know what the roster looks like next year enough to especially commit 8 years to the guy when you've got only Matthews now 2 or 3 more years I think after this, and
Yeah.
then Mitch Marner, you don't really know. John Tavares, you don't really know. Like the status of this roster going forward is kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. But the other thing is, maybe possibly you get Mikko Rantanen, and you have two-star wingers in Mikko Rantanen and Mitch Marner. I'm saying two because then you trade William Nylander and turn him into some more star players, whether that be another center or whatever it is, or another winger, to complement the guys just because and get a lesser salary in return just because you can't pay everyone
Yeah.
over $10 million. So
Well, and that's the
that might have
thing. Yeah.
been the better play.
Well, and you don't know, like I said, without if maybe all of these guys, if you say you had Marner under contract, say you had Tavares under contract, that type of plan may be a little bit more clear. It may be easier to visualize, but without knowing really unless they have a better idea of what if maybe they just Mitch is they have a plan. This is going to be Mitch number, hopefully. This is going to be John's number, hopefully, and that's how they're playing it out. But I think if you add Rantanen to the mix and you're kind of changing the power struggle. You're kind of everyone has to adapt to having a new player like that who comes in and is commanding a ton of money, and that just kind of changes how everything feels. Not to say they were obviously involved and wanted him, but I just don't know like to me personally, I don't know that I saw like the fit. But
Mhm.
he's a great player. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, that's fair.
I
That's
think
fair.
it's fair to talk about just some of the moves quickly that the Leafs did make. They brought in Scott Laughton, they brought in Brandon Carlo. We did touch on both. Scott Laughton down the middle obviously really shores up your third line center, and this is the talk that the Leafs were going to try and pull this move off with either him or Braden Shen for the past like month, probably since the beginning of the season. Because it's tough to go into this year and look at that center depth and think that was successful. They got their guy, Toronto boy, one of the best social media posts I've seen in a long time with his Last Supper post, like last week. Who apparently he was just
Yeah,
like,
it
oh, I
was
thought
really
this would be
good.
funny. He didn't think he would get as much traction as it did. And then bringing in the Brandon Carlo, who's probably going to be your second line pairing with Morgan Riley, and then you have your Tanev and your McCabe once Tanev's back. Brandon, I know you had some thoughts maybe on this, on some of the moves they made. Maybe you didn't. I'm sure you do. Just what do the Leafs look like? What do they look like heading into the playoffs now?
No, absolutely. And I'll keep this pretty brief because we've gone back and forth
Sure.
with the Leafs already
Yes.
so much. I think that they did fantastic. I think they after making the decision to pivot off Rantanen, they kind of reset their eyes, it seems like, and to me picked two of the better players to fill the two biggest needs that they had, I think, which was that third line center. Scott Lawn's going to come in. He's going to play very physically. He's going to be able to put the puck in the net, hopefully a little bit more than some of the other guys that have been in that position. And he's going to offer you just that kind of dog mentality of a guy who's played in Philly, who's physical. He's going to be going in deep, going to the the hard parts, going to the front of the net, going to the corners, and he's going to defend really well. His numbers there are really good as well, so I like that. And Carlo just a big defensive guy who's been there before. He knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. He's been in some really tough series, and he offers again that right side. I think I saw. I think you mentioned it earlier, Alex. Like the right shot defenseman that this team
Mm-hmm.
have kind of deployed over the last few years has been um, kind of laughable. And for them to be
Yeah.
able to get two guys when you look at Tanev in the last calendar year, it's really been very refreshing to see Treliving be able to kind of put together a strong defensive core like he has, and one that I think it can go up against, especially in the Eastern Conference. Like I think it can match up against pretty much anybody. Like you just gotta, as long as the team can score. I really like the position that they're in going forward, and you factor in the goaltending. They I don't think they've ever been in a better position in the Shanahan era. So I love it.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think you're right. Is that your
Do
biggest
we want
winner?
to? Yeah, this will go into
I
biggest
th
winners and losers.
I honestly would still, I know we talked about it briefly at the top of the show. I would still probably go Dallas just because of what Rantanen
Okay.
kind of represents and the ability to get the long-term deal done. The complexity of making that trade, I think for them and Dallas, they've got to feel really, really good about their short-term and their long-term success. The only thing that gives me pause is just like you bring in a great player who didn't have a great start on his first attempt at a new team. But I think he's going to be great in Dallas. So that would be my probably winner. But a close second would be the Leafs. I just loved what they did.
Okay. Interesting.
I would say my number one winner would be Florida. Florida getting Seth
Yep.
Jones and getting Brad Marchand and Nico Stern. That's an incredible deadline for them. Great moves all around. Second, I would probably go either Dallas or Colorado. I think Colorado, what they were able to do with their roster, they're scary now. Like they're
Yeah.
2022 scary.
Yeah, I will go with Florida as well. I do think that Marchand trade yesterday pushes them over the line. Seth Jones earlier, Vanacek even as a backup after getting rid of Spencer Knight is a
Yeah,
real
true,
sneaky
true.
deal,
Forgot about
right?
him.
Nico
Yep.
Sturm's a good, solid fourth line player, maybe third if you're hurting, but I do think they shored up in a lot of different places. I like Dallas too. You know what? I like Dallas too, and I know it's not a trade deadline, but you brought it up earlier, Justin. The Johnston signing is massive, and that probably gives
Yeah,
them confidence
that's
going into the playoffs with the deal. So they might be
yeah,
scary. They might be scary. Biggest losers.
yeah.
What do you think are biggest losers on this deadline, Justin? We'll go to you first for this one.
So yeah, I think Winnipeg is definitely one of the biggest losers in this deadline. Actually, I have two Canadian teams that are the biggest losers. I think honestly, Winnipeg and you can say three Canadian teams realistically, but I'm gonna say Edmonton.
Yep.
The other team is Vancouver. I think Edmonton's one of the biggest losers. They went and made moves. Like they made moves that were good moves, but they don't fit the team at all, like in my personal opinion. And so for me, that's why they're the biggest losers. They just we'll see how it plays out. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but Jake Wallman, great defenseman, is so offensively defend or like so offensive that like you already have that in Evan Bouchard. What do you need that for in Jake Wallman? Like you need a defenseman to stay home. That's what you needed, and they
They
just
also have
totally
them. They
ignored
have them
that.
on the same pairing right now on daily faceoff, which would be like there's no one play. It's like a power play unit.
Hey, we're not playing defense. If it gets behind us, Stuart Skinner, you better make a save,
Figure
bud.
it out. Yeah. Yep. Brandon.
Uh, I do like the Edmonton one. I do think they kind of miscalculated what they needed maybe or maybe they just didn't like what was available or they couldn't acquire. They did have a lot of cap issues, I think, going into the deadline too, like which kind of restrained a
Yeah,
little bit what they
that's
could
fair.
do. My other one is not a Canadian team actually, and it's not even really like a loser. Like I don't think that they didn't really do anything wrong. I they kind of were subject to some bad luck, and that's the New Jersey Devils.
Mm.
They obviously with Jack Hughes being only last week being reported out for the season after his shoulder injury. I think people were like, oh, they might be very aggressive. They might try to replace, if not bring in a star player, at least bring in maybe like a second liner who can kind of help and address some of their scoring issues that they're going to have. We talked about it earlier. They don't seem to project a very strong playoff team at this point. So I was just disappointed that they weren't a little bit more aggressive. I know Tom Fitzgerald there, the GM, is really looking long term, and I think that's smart. But some of the moves that they made, Dennis Cholowski and Cody Glass, things like this, like they
Brian
clearly maybe
Dumoulin. Yeah.
had those guys. They maybe Dumoulin's a great example too. Like they needed help on defense, and I think that helped shore up, but they clearly didn't address, what's going to be the elephant in the room is that this team's going to have trouble scoring, and Sheldon Keefe's going to have quite the job to do when you get to a potential playoff series, and you're looking at a Carolina Hurricanes team or potentially a Washington Capitals team, and it's going to be really tough to match up against some of those, big, tough offensive teams.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I will say my pick was gonna be sneaky Edmonton, but you did say the same thing, Justin. But I won't beat a dead horse, but I do think that bottom six still with Trent Frederick, he's been having a down year. He's got a bit of offensive touch and some snarl, which is great for playoffs, but I still don't see them scoring outside of your big dogs in Draisaitl, McDavid, and if Hyman, with stretches has obviously been successful. If he picks things up, maybe, but they're beat down after a little while, and hopefully they can make some noise. But it's funny picking the biggest winner as the Stanley Cup winner and the biggest loser as the biggest loser last year, as in dropping the Stanley Cup final. But I will say Vegas, just because they didn't do anything. Like I think everyone was just anticipating Vegas and they held on to it and they said hi and we're all like, hello, what do you got going on? And then they went ghost on everybody. So I'm happy because Vegas is obviously a bothersome team for people out there who utilize that LTIR. It is legal, so we can't get mad at them, but they didn't do anything. I do disagree with you on the Winnipeg Jets, Justin, but that's why we embrace debate. I do think they shored up what they needed to do, and I think they're poised for a run, but that division is very, very scary. So I'm curious to see who comes out of there. But we'll see. I'm excited for the rest of the road down to playoff race. So we'll come back with some more
If you
info
have
down the
prime,
line.
if you have prime Hellebucket, nothing should matter, right?
Hopefully, but playoff Hellebuck might shed its ugly head, and hopefully for his sake and for the Canadian teams, he doesn't. That's my pick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All good episode, boys. We had Alex. Thanks to Alex Adams again from Sportsnet.
Really
Great
good
interview with
episode.
him. Yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
talk, but we had to, right? It was a busy day for everybody involved. So hopefully these trades work out. We'll come down with some more analysis down the line as the NHL heads towards its playoff race in a couple of months. Otherwise, thanks for joining. Like, subscribe, listen again if you want to. Leave as many stars as you can. And otherwise, we will see you next time.